In 1849, archaeologist Austin Henry Layard stood in the ruins of an ancient Assyrian palace, covered in dust, staring at something impossible. Beneath his feet lay 22,000 clay tablets, humanity's oldest library, preserved for millennia. But these weren't just records of kings and wars. These tablets told a different story, a forbidden story. They described, in precise detail, how human beings were created by visitors from the sky. Not as poetry, not as myth, as documented history. Picture this moment. Layard didn't know what he'd found. None of them did. These tablets had been buried since 612 BCE, when Nineveh fell and this library burned. But clay doesn't burn. It bakes, it hardens. And so these words survived, waiting. What those tablets said would eventually shake everything we think we know about human origins. But here's the thing, we weren't supposed to understand them, not yet. For over 70 years these tablets sat in museums, untranslated. The language was dead. Cuneiform, wedge-shaped marks pressed into clay by hands that died thousands of years ago. It took generations of scholars to crack the code, and when they finally did, when they could actually read what ancient Sumer had written, they found something that made no sense. The tablet spoke of beings called the Anunnaki. The name itself is a puzzle. Break it down. Anu, the sky god, the highest authority. Ki, earth. Put them together and you get something that translates roughly to those who from heaven to earth came. Not metaphorically. The Sumerian scribes weren't writing poetry. They were writing history, their history. And according to them, human history began with visitors. Now, mainstream scholars will tell you these are just myths. Ancient people trying to explain the world through stories about gods. Fair enough, we've all heard that explanation. But here's what they don't emphasize. These myths are incredibly specific. They have names, dates, genealogies, and purposes. They describe technology. They describe genetic processes. They describe systems of government and labor management. That's not how myths work. Myths are vague, they're symbolic. But the Sumerian tablets? They read like administrative documents, like someone was keeping records. Let me give you an example. The term they used for humans, Lulu. Scholars translate this as primitive worker or mixed being, not beloved creation, not children of the gods. Worker, mixed being. These tablets explain in uncomfortable detail that humans were created for a specific purpose, to serve the Anunnaki, to do the labor they didn't want to do. Think about that for a second. The oldest written records of human civilization describe us as employees, biological machinery designed for a job. But it gets stranger. These weren't the only ancient people telling this story. Thousands of miles away, separated by oceans and centuries, completely different civilizations wrote eerily similar accounts. The Mayans spoke of Quetzalcoatl, beings who descended from the sky and gave humans knowledge. The ancient Indians wrote about the Nagas, serpentine beings from the heavens who interacted with early humans. The Egyptians, the Hopi Indians, the Chinese, all of them have variations of the same narrative. Sky people, visitors, creators. Now, you could argue that's just universal human psychology. We all look up at the stars and wonder. We all create myths about gods coming down. Maybe. But why are the details so consistent? Why do they all describe similar technology, flying crafts, advanced knowledge, genetic manipulation? Why do they all establish the same hierarchical structure, a small group of powerful beings governing a larger population of humans? Here's where it gets uncomfortable. In 1906, archaeologists discovered something called the Sumerian King List. It's a UNESCO-recognized ancient document, completely legitimate, sitting in museums right now, that chronicles the rulers of ancient Sumer. And it's bizarre. The list begins with kings who ruled for thousands of years, not a few decades. Thousands. One king supposedly ruled for 43,200 years, another for 28,800 years. The list goes on like this. Impossibly long reigns by impossibly long-lived rulers. And then, suddenly, after something the tablets call the flood, everything changes. Kings start ruling for normal human lifespans, decades, not millennia. Mainstream archaeology dismisses these numbers as mythological exaggeration. But here's the question they can't answer. Why would the Sumerians, who were meticulous record keepers, who invented accounting and mathematics, suddenly switch from fantasy numbers to realistic ones? What changed? What if something did change? What if the long reigns weren't human rulers at all? Zecharia Sitchin, a researcher who spent 30 years translating these tablets, proposed something radical in 1976. He suggested we should read these texts literally, that the Anunnaki were real, that they came to Earth, genetically engineered humans from existing hominids, and established a control system to manage their creation, that we are, quite literally, a designed species. Academic scholars rejected this interpretation, violently. They called it pseudoscience, fantasy, dangerous. And maybe they're right. Maybe Sitchin was reading too much into ancient mythology. But here's what you need to understand. Sitchin and mainstream scholars agree on what the tablets say. They agree on the translations. The dispute isn't about the words, it's about what those words mean. When the Enuma Elish, Babylon's creation epic, describes the god Enki mixing the clay of the earth with divine blood to create humans, mainstream scholars say that's metaphor. Sitchin asks, what if it's not? What if ancient people were describing genetic engineering in the only language they had? Mixing terrestrial genetics, the clay, the earth, with something else, something from the sky? Consider what we know about genetic engineering today. We can splice DNA from different species. We can modify organisms to serve specific purposes. We created corn that can't reproduce without human intervention. We engineered bacteria that produce insulin. We're designing humans right now. CRISPR technology lets us edit genes before birth. We're doing exactly what these tablets describe. The only difference? We call it science. They called it divine creation. And here's something that should make you pause. Ancient cylinder seals, those small stone cylinders carved with images, show scenes that don't fit the primitive narrative. They show beings significantly taller than humans, wearing unusual clothing with geometric patterns, interacting with humans in clearly hierarchical relationships. Some seals show what look like technical diagrams, precise astronomical charts, cellular-looking structures, symbols that suggest advanced knowledge. These people supposedly didn't have writing before Sumer. They supposedly didn't have astronomy, mathematics, or urban planning. And yet, suddenly, around 3500 BCE, Sumerian civilization appears fully formed, complete with everything: writing systems, legal codes, architectural knowledge, advanced astronomy. No gradual development, no trial and error, just there. That bothers archaeologists, even though they won't often admit it. Civilizations are supposed to develop slowly. Stone tools, then bronze, then writing, then math, then cities. That's how it works everywhere else, but not Sumer. Sumer breaks the rules. It's like someone handed them a complete instruction manual and said, "Start here." Now, I need to tell you about Dr. Michael Heiser. He's an actual academic, Ph.D. in Hebrew Bible and ancient Semitic languages. In 2018, he published a book specifically about the Anunnaki, translating primary Mesopotamian sources. And here's what makes his work important. He's not trying to prove ancient aliens. He's trying to understand what these texts actually say, academically, rigorously, and even he admits the texts are strange. He documents how the tablets describe elaborate hierarchies, councils of Anunnaki making decisions, territorial divisions, specialized roles. The tablets mention the Igigi, another class of beings serving the Anunnaki who eventually rebelled. This rebellion, according to the texts, is why humans were created in the first place, to replace the Igigi as workers. Heiser doesn't conclude these were extraterrestrials, but he does acknowledge that mainstream archaeology often downplays how specific and detailed these ancient accounts are. The academic community has a tendency to dismiss what doesn't fit the narrative, not because of conspiracy, but because it's uncomfortable, because it raises questions we don't have answers for. Questions like, why do the oldest human records describe us as a created species? Why do they specify we were created to work? Why do dozens of unconnected ancient cultures tell versions of the same story? And why does the physical evidence, the sudden appearance of advanced civilization, the strange artifacts, the detailed technical knowledge, align with these accounts? You might be thinking, so what? Even if ancient people believed they were created by sky beings, that doesn't make it true. Maybe they were just wrong. Maybe they worshipped natural phenomena they didn't understand and turned them into myths. Maybe. But here's the final piece that doesn't fit. These tablets don't just describe creation. They describe governance. They describe a hierarchical system. Anunnaki at the top, priests and kings in the middle, humans at the bottom. They describe resource extraction, specifically gold mining. They describe genetic modifications done to improve worker efficiency. They describe psychological control through religion and fear. They describe all of this in extraordinary administrative detail, like someone was documenting a management system. And that system, the hierarchy, the resource extraction, the labor management, the psychological control through belief systems, it's still here, unchanged. We live in it right now. Every modern institution operates on the exact model these tablets describe. Small elite making decisions, layers of management enforcing those decisions, large population providing labor and resources, control maintained through economic dependency, belief systems, and the threat of force. That structure is 5,000 years old. It appeared in Sumer, it spread everywhere, and it's never changed. So here's the question that should keep you awake tonight. Is that a coincidence? Did humans independently invent the same control system over and over again? Or were we taught this system, given a template that we've followed ever since without questioning why? But if these texts describe an actual system of control established in ancient times, we must ask, did that control end when the Anunnaki supposedly departed? Or did they simply make it invisible, embedding it so deeply into human civilization that we would continue operating within their systems, without ever recognizing the architecture of our own containment? In 2003, scientists finished mapping the entire human genome, 3 billion base pairs, every gene, every sequence, the complete instruction manual for building a human being. And they found something that shouldn't exist. 223 genes with no ancestors. Let me say that again. 223 genes in your DNA that have no evolutionary history, no predecessors, no gradual development. They just appear. In humans, nowhere else. Think about what that means. Evolution is supposed to be a slow process, tiny changes over millions of years. You inherit traits from your parents, who inherited from their parents, stretching back through every ancestor to the first single-celled organism. It's a chain, an unbroken genetic chain going back billions of years. Except these 223 genes broke the chain. They're called orphan genes, and they make no sense. It's like finding a chapter in a book written in a completely different language by a completely different author. It doesn't fit. It shouldn't be there. Francis Crick noticed this problem. You might know him. He won the Nobel Prize for discovering DNA's structure, the double helix. This guy understood genetics better than almost anyone alive, and in 1973 he published something that shocked the scientific community. He proposed that life on Earth might have been intentionally seeded from elsewhere. Directed panspermia, he called it. The idea that an advanced civilization could have sent genetic material to Earth deliberately, not accidentally, deliberately, like planting a garden. Now, most scientists dismissed this as wild speculation from a brilliant man having a creative moment. But here's what you need to understand. Crick didn't propose this casually. He proposed it because the genetics didn't add up. Because when you actually look at human DNA, really look at it, there are pieces that make you wonder if someone was editing the code. So if ancient tablets describe genetic engineering, and our actual genetics show anomalies that mainstream science can't explain, maybe, just maybe, we should pay attention. Let's start with something specific. Chromosome 2. Every great ape has 24 pairs of chromosomes. Chimps, 24 pairs. Gorillas, 24 pairs. Orangutans, 24 pairs. Humans, 23 pairs. We're missing one. Except we're not missing it. It's there. It's just fused together. Human chromosome 2 is actually 2 chromosomes stuck together, like someone took 2 separate books and bound them as one volume. You can see the evidence under a microscope. The fusion site is visible. There are even leftover genetic remnants, telomeres in the middle of the chromosome where they shouldn't be, inactive centromeres that used to function. It's like finding the seam where 2 pieces of metal were welded together. Mainstream science says this was a random mutation that happened naturally, and maybe it was. Random chromosomal fusion happens sometimes. But here's the thing that bothers geneticists. This fusion is unique to humans. It separates us from every other primate, and it happened recently in evolutionary terms. Very recently. And the timing is strange. Humans acquired advanced cognitive abilities incredibly fast. Anatomically modern humans appeared around 300,000 years ago. But the cognitive revolution, language, art, symbolic thinking, complex tools, that exploded roughly 70,000 years ago. That's fast. Ridiculously fast for evolutionary standards. Historian Yuval Noah Harari calls this the cognitive revolution. In his book, Sapiens, he describes how humans went from just another animal species to the dominant force on the planet in the blink of an evolutionary eye. We didn't get smarter gradually. We got smarter suddenly. Too suddenly. What caused it? Nobody knows. Mainstream science offers theories, maybe a genetic mutation, maybe social changes, maybe environmental pressure. But they're guesses. Educated guesses, but guesses. Meanwhile, the Sumerian tablets describe exactly this: beings taking primitive humans and upgrading them, enhancing cognitive abilities, giving them language, making them into something new. Coincidence? Maybe. Or maybe ancient people were describing something real using the only language they had. Now, there's another genetic mystery that connects to the creation story. Mitochondrial Eve and Y-chromosomal Adam. These aren't religious concepts, they're genetic discoveries. By tracing mutations in mitochondrial DNA and Y chromosomes backward through time, scientists can identify common ancestors. And here's what they found. All humans alive today descend from one woman who lived roughly 150,000 years ago and one man who lived roughly 300,000 years ago. Wait, those numbers don't match. How can everyone descend from a man who lived 150,000 years before the woman? It's because these aren't literal Adam and Eve. They're the most recent common ancestors through different genetic lines. But here's what's interesting. The genetic diversity of modern humans is incredibly low compared to other species. Chimpanzees, despite being far fewer in number, have much more genetic diversity than humans. It's like humanity went through a severe genetic bottleneck, like we all descend from a very small starting population. Which is exactly what the Sumerian tablets describe. A small initial population of created humans. A genetic founder group. But let's talk about something even stranger. Junk DNA. For decades, scientists noticed that the vast majority of human DNA doesn't code for proteins. About 98% of your genome doesn't seem to do anything. They called it junk DNA. Evolutionary leftovers. Genetic trash that accumulated over millions of years. Except, it's not junk. We're discovering that these non-coding regions contain complex regulatory information. They control when genes turn on and off. They influence development. They contain instructions that we're only beginning to understand. It's like finding a massive operating system running in the background that nobody knew existed. And here's where it gets wild. Some researchers suggest we have dormant genetic programs, capabilities that are coded into our DNA but not activated, like having software installed on your computer that's never been opened. What if certain abilities are there, written in our genes, just turned off? Think about what that means. If humans were designed, wouldn't it make sense to include limitations? To give us certain capabilities while restricting others? You don't give your tools abilities you can't control. Now, let me tell you about FOXP2. It's a gene that affects speech and language ability, and in humans, this gene is unique. It's different from every other primate. The changes are tiny, just a few amino acid substitutions, but the effect is massive. Without functional FOXP2, humans can't develop normal language. With it, we have the most sophisticated communication system on the planet. And this gene appeared recently, in evolutionary terms. Very recently. Some estimates put it around 200,000 years ago, right around the time modern humans emerged. The Sumerian tablets say the Anunnaki gave humans language, that it was a gift, an upgrade. Science says a mutation in FOXP2 gave humans language, that it was random, an accident. Same result, different explanation. But here's what science can't explain. Why did this specific mutation appear at this specific time? Perfectly coordinated with brain structure changes that enabled language processing. That's a lot of lucky accidents happening simultaneously. And the human brain itself is weird. Yes, our brains are bigger than other primates, but size isn't everything. Elephants have bigger brains than us. Whales have bigger brains. Size alone doesn't explain human intelligence. What's unique is structure. Our prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for planning, abstract thinking, and self-control, is disproportionately large and complex. Our neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to reorganize itself, is extraordinary. We can learn new skills throughout our lives. Most animals can't. Svante Pääbo, who won the Nobel Prize for sequencing Neanderthal DNA, points out something fascinating. Neanderthals had larger brains than modern humans. Larger. But they didn't develop complex language or symbolic culture at our level. Brain size didn't determine intelligence. Something else did. Something specific to our brain's wiring. And that wiring appeared recently. Fast. Too fast for gradual evolution to fully explain. Now, here's where ancient description meets modern technology. Let's talk about genetic engineering. In 2012, scientists developed CRISPR, a gene editing tool that lets us cut and paste DNA like editing text in a document. We can take genes from one organism and insert them into another. We can modify existing genes. We can create new traits that never existed in nature. We're doing exactly what the Sumerian tablets describe. Taking genetic material from different sources, mixing them, creating something new. The tablets say Enki mixed the clay of earth with divine essence to create humans. Ancient scholars said that's metaphor, but what if it's description? What if clay of earth meant terrestrial genetics, hominid DNA, and divine essence meant something else, something from outside? We'd describe it as gene splicing now. They described it as mixing clay with divine blood. Same process, different vocabulary. And we're getting good at it, really good. In 2018, a Chinese scientist named He Jiankui used CRISPR to edit human embryos. He created genetically modified babies. The scientific community was outraged, but the capability exists. We can modify humans before birth now. We've become the engineers. And maybe that's not new. Maybe we're just continuing something that was started a long time ago. There's another genetic mystery worth mentioning. Retroviruses. These are viruses that insert their DNA into their host's genome. And over evolutionary time, some of this viral DNA becomes permanent. About 8% of human DNA is actually ancient viral sequences. They're called endogenous retroviruses. Now, mainstream science views this as natural. Viruses infected our ancestors, and some of that genetic material stuck around. But here's the interesting part. Some of these viral sequences are functional. They do things. They affect human development. They're not just leftovers. What if this wasn't entirely random? What if viruses could be used as delivery mechanisms for genetic modifications? We use them that way now in gene therapy. We engineer viruses to carry new DNA into cells. Could an advanced civilization use the same method to modify a species over time? Plant genetic changes that would spread through populations naturally via viral vectors? It's speculative, but it's possible. And then there's the Rh-negative blood type. About 15% of humans have it. If you're Rh-negative and have an Rh-positive baby, your immune system treats the baby as foreign. Your body attacks it. That's not normal. That's not how genetics usually works within a species. Some researchers have noted that Rh-negative blood appears most frequently in certain populations, particularly those descending from ancient regions where the Anunnaki were said to have established their earliest civilizations. Mesopotamia, parts of Europe, the Basque people have the highest concentration. Is it related? Nobody knows. But it's strange, and ancient texts consistently mention certain bloodlines being special, having direct divine ancestry, being different from common humans. What if those weren't metaphors? What if certain family lines actually carried different genetics? But here's what should really make you uncomfortable. We're modifying our own genetics now. Right now, researchers are working on germline editing, changes that get passed to offspring. We're talking about designer babies, enhanced intelligence, enhanced strength, longer lifespans. We're doing to ourselves what the tablets claim was done to us, and we're following a script, like there's a program running, like we are unconsciously replicating ancient processes because they're somehow embedded in our culture, our institutions, our collective memory. Epigenetics research shows that experiences can be encoded in DNA and passed to offspring. Trauma can be inherited. Stress responses can be inherited. Information transfers across generations through genetic mechanisms we're only beginning to understand. What if memories can be inherited too, not consciously, but as archetypes, as myths, as stories that every culture tells because they're coded into our biology? What if the reason every civilization has creation myths about sky beings is because those myths are genetic memories? That sounds crazy, I know, but the science of genetic memory is real. Mice can inherit fear of specific smells from their parents. Humans show inherited trauma responses. The mechanism exists, and if the mechanism exists, what else might be inherited? What information might be encoded in that 98% of DNA we used to call junk? Let me bring this back to something concrete. The Human Genome Project found those 223 orphan genes, genes with no predecessors. And researchers have tried to explain them. Horizontal gene transfer from bacteria, they say. Random mutations that erased the evolutionary trail. Natural processes we don't fully understand yet. Maybe that's the answer. But what if it's not? What if those genes are signatures, evidence of modification, of engineering? You can look at a building and tell whether it was naturally formed or constructed. You can look at a tool and distinguish it from a rock. Design leaves fingerprints. Engineering leaves patterns. And our DNA is full of patterns that look less like random evolution and more like intentional design. The chromosome fusion, the rapid cognitive enhancement, the orphan genes, the species-wide genetic bottleneck, the unique language abilities, the structural brain changes. Each one alone could be coincidence, natural processes, random chance. But all of them together, all at once, all in the same species, in a short time frame, creating capabilities no other organism has? That starts to look like a pattern. Now, I'm not saying this proves ancient genetic engineering. Science doesn't work that way. We need more evidence, more research, more verification. But what I am saying is this: the evidence we have doesn't rule it out. The genetics we're discovering make it plausible. And if it's plausible that humans were genetically modified in the past, then we need to ask harder questions. Like why? Why would someone engineer a species? What was the purpose? The Sumerian tablets answer that. Workers, servants. A labor force designed with intelligence to follow instructions but limitations to prevent rebellion. And that brings us back to control. If human genetics do show signs of intervention, the question becomes, who benefits from a species specifically designed for certain cognitive capabilities while limited in others? And are those limitations still operating, keeping us from perceiving or breaking free from ancient control systems embedded in our very biology? So we've established that human genetics might show signs of intervention, that our biology could contain embedded limitations. But here's the question nobody's asking. Even if we could break free biologically, would it matter? Because there's another cage, one we can actually see, one we live in every single day. Look around you right now. Your workplace, your government, your school, your bank. Every single institution operates the same way. Small group at the top making decisions. Layers of management in the middle, enforcing those decisions. Large population at the bottom doing the actual work. Top, middle, bottom. Every corporation, every government, every organization. Same structure, always. This wasn't humanity's only option. We could have organized differently, horizontally, cooperatively, in rotating leadership. But we didn't. For 5,000 years, we've built the same hierarchy over and over and over again. Why? Here's what should bother you. The first time this structure appears in human history, the first documented bureaucracy, the first administrative state, is ancient Sumer. And it doesn't develop gradually. It appears fully formed, complete, like someone installed a template and said, build it exactly like this. And we've been following that template ever since. Let me show you what I mean. In 2017, anthropologist James C. Scott published a book called Against the Grain, examining how early states developed. And he found something disturbing. Clay tablet archives from ancient Sumer show incredibly sophisticated record-keeping systems. Tax collection, labor management, resource allocation, specialized administrative roles. These people had just invented writing, and they immediately used it to build a control infrastructure. Not poetry, not stories. Control systems. They tracked who owed what, who worked where, who produced how much. They created job titles and hierarchical positions. They established reporting structures. They built, essentially, the first corporation. And the tablets don't show this developing gradually. Year 1, basic symbols. Year 5, complete administrative apparatus. Like they were following instructions. Like someone taught them exactly how to organize human populations for maximum control. Now look at the Atrahasis epic. It's an ancient Mesopotamian text describing the Anunnaki governance structure, and it's remarkably specific. The Anunnaki operated through councils. Decisions required consensus among the elite. Anu presided, but other powerful beings, Enlil, Enki, and others, had voices. They divided territories. They assigned responsibilities. They created chains of command. Sound familiar? That's a corporate board. That's exactly how modern corporations operate. Board of directors making strategic decisions. CEO executing those decisions. Middle management enforcing policy. Workers producing value. Same structure, 5,000 years apart. David Graeber and David Wengrow, in their book The Dawn of Everything, argue that hierarchical organization wasn't inevitable. They document archaeological evidence showing that many ancient societies organized completely differently. Seasonal leadership, rotating authority, egalitarian decision-making. These alternatives existed. They worked, but they didn't spread. They didn't become the template. The hierarchical model did. The Sumerian model, the model that first appears when the Anunnaki supposedly governed Earth, and once it was installed, it never went away. Think about your job, any job. Doesn't matter if you're flipping burgers or running code, you have a boss. That boss has a boss. That boss reports to someone higher, and at the very top, there's a small group, executives, board members, shareholders, making the real decisions. You don't know them. You'll never meet them. But they determine your wages, your hours, your working conditions. They have power over your life. And you accepted this arrangement so completely that you probably never questioned it. Why should anyone have a boss? Why should decisions flow from the top down? Why not the reverse? Why not horizontal? Because that's not the template. That's not how the system was designed. Here's something even stranger: specialization. In ancient Sumer, the tablets describe how humans were assigned specific roles: farmers, builders, scribes, miners. Each person did one thing. They became experts in their narrow task, but understood nothing of the complete system. A farmer knew farming. A builder knew building, but neither understood how the whole civilization functioned. They couldn't. Their knowledge was deliberately limited, and that pattern continues today. In 1911, Frederick Taylor published The Principles of Scientific Management, revolutionizing industrial organization. His idea? Break complex tasks into tiny specialized components. Each worker performs one small, repetitive action. Nobody sees the whole picture. Nobody understands the complete process. This was sold as efficiency, but it's also control. When you understand only your small part, you can't challenge the system. You can't build an alternative. You're dependent. If you rebel, they replace you with someone else who knows your one specialized task. Adam Smith called this division of labor. Karl Marx called it alienation. But maybe it's older than either of them realized. Maybe it's part of the original design. And here's what really bothers historians. Every civilization, independently, across the globe, adopted similar hierarchical structures. Egypt, China, Mesoamerica, the Indus Valley, all of them built pyramids of power. Different continents, different time periods, same organizational model. Either that's an inevitable result of human nature, or someone was spreading the same template. Now let's talk about something uncomfortable: hereditary power. Throughout history, humans have repeatedly created dynasties, bloodlines, families that maintain power across generations, and we hate this. We've fought wars to end it. We've written constitutions forbidding it. We've killed kings and emperors and nobles. And then we immediately create new dynasties, new hereditary elites. Different names, same structure. Why? If we hate hereditary power so much, why do we keep recreating it? Look at modern democracies. The Bush family, the Clinton family, the Kennedy family. Political dynasties that persist despite supposedly equal opportunity. Look at corporations. Founders pass companies to children. Wealthy families accumulate more wealth across generations. The system claims to be merit-based, but power still flows through bloodlines. The Sumerian tablets describe exactly this. The Anunnaki assigned territories to their children. Enlil's son got one region. Enki's son got another. Power flowed through family lines. Genetic inheritance of authority. And we're still doing it. Like it's programmed. Like we can't imagine any other way. Religious institutions are even more obvious. The structure of organized religion hasn't changed in millennia. There's a priesthood, a special class who claims to mediate between humans and the divine. They control knowledge. They interpret sacred texts. They maintain hierarchical authority. Below them, believers, followers, people who accept that they need intermediaries to access spiritual truth. Ancient texts describe this exactly. The Anunnaki established priests to manage human populations. These priests performed rituals, collected tribute, enforced obedience. They were the interface between gods and humans. And that system never ended. Christianity has priests. Islam has imams. Judaism has rabbis. Hinduism has Brahmins. Buddhism has monks. Different religions, different gods, but the same structural relationship. Elite intermediaries controlling access to the divine. Even in religions that claim direct spiritual access, hierarchies emerge. Protestant Christianity rebelled against Catholic priesthood, then immediately created pastors and church leadership. It's like humans can't organize religion any other way. Or maybe we were taught there's only one way. Now, let's discuss legal systems. The Code of Hammurabi, written around 1750 BCE, is one of history's most famous law codes. But it wasn't the first. Sumerian legal texts predate it by centuries, and they establish something crucial: written law enforced by institutional authority. Before this, communities handled disputes through customs, tribal elders, communal agreement. But state-level societies needed something different. They needed standardized control, rules that applied universally, punishment for non-compliance. The Sumerian legal codes are shockingly sophisticated. Property rights, contract enforcement, criminal punishment, all designed to maintain social order and protect the hierarchy. And every legal system since follows the same pattern: laws written by elites, enforced by police and courts, punishment for deviation. It's behavior control, standardized and institutionalized. Michel Foucault, in his book Discipline and Punish, analyzes how modern institutions shape behavior. He describes how schools, prisons, hospitals, and factories all use similar techniques: surveillance, standardization, punishment, and reward to produce compliant subjects. He didn't realize how old these techniques are. They're not modern inventions. They're ancient technologies, refined over millennia. The military structure is perhaps the clearest example. Ancient texts describe how the Anunnaki organized military forces: strict hierarchies, chain of command, absolute obedience. Soldiers didn't question orders, they executed them. And every military since operates identically. Ranks, officers and enlisted, orders flowing from the top down, severe punishment for disobedience. Modern nation-states maintain this structure precisely. They monopolize violence. Citizens aren't allowed to organize armed forces independently. Only the state can authorize violence. Only the hierarchy can command it. This isn't coincidence. It's control. Whoever controls organized violence controls everything else. Education systems are even more insidious. In ancient Sumer, temple schools trained scribes and priests. These schools controlled knowledge access. They determined who learned writing, mathematics, and religious texts. They shaped thinking. They produced loyalty to the system. Modern education follows the same model: standardized curriculum, grades and credentials, teachers as authority figures. Schools don't primarily teach critical thinking. They teach compliance. Sit still, follow instructions, accept what you're told, succeed within the system. And it works. Most people never question the institutional structure they're raised in. They learn their place in the hierarchy and stay there. But here's what's truly disturbing. Psychology research shows how easily humans adopt hierarchical roles and obey authority. In 1961, psychologist Stanley Milgram conducted his famous obedience experiments. He found that ordinary people would administer potentially lethal electric shocks to strangers simply because an authority figure told them to. Not because they wanted to, not because they thought it was right, because someone in a position of authority commanded it. 65% of participants obeyed completely. In 1971, the Stanford prison experiment showed something equally troubling. College students randomly assigned to be guards or prisoners quickly adopted their roles. Guards became cruel. Prisoners became submissive. In days, not weeks. Like the roles activated something already present in human psychology. Maybe that's natural human behavior. Or maybe it's programmed behavior. Maybe we're psychologically designed to fit into hierarchies, to obey authority, to accept our position in the structure. That would be the perfect control system. You wouldn't need physical force if your subjects wanted to obey. Now consider institutional immortality. You and I will die. Everyone we know will die, but institutions persist. Corporations outlive their founders. Governments outlast their leaders. Religious organizations span millennia. And as they persist, they accumulate power. They develop interests separate from any individual member. They become autonomous entities following their own programming. The Catholic Church has existed for 2,000 years. It's survived countless popes, weathered reformations, adapted to changing times. But the core structure, the hierarchy, the authority, the control, never changes. Same with governments. Dynasties rise and fall. Political systems transform, but the hierarchical state structure persists. Always a ruling class, always enforcement mechanisms, always populations controlled from above. These institutions operate according to embedded code, and that code might be older than we think. Throughout history, humans have attempted alternatives: egalitarian communities, anarchist experiments, cooperative economics, the Paris Commune, the Spanish collectives, the kibbutzim, countless attempts to organize without hierarchies. They all failed, or were destroyed. Why? Hierarchical systems claim it's because alternatives are impractical, unstable, vulnerable. But maybe it's simpler. Maybe hierarchies have more resources, more experience, more institutional support. Because they're the template. They're what the system was designed to produce. Alternatives aren't suppressed by conspiracy. They're suppressed by the entire weight of civilization, operating according to its original programming. And here's the really crazy part. Civilizations that developed in complete isolation from each other independently created nearly identical hierarchical structures. Mesopotamian city-states, Chinese dynasties, Aztec empires, Egyptian pharaohs, all built the same pyramid of power, all established specialized labor, all created legal codes, military hierarchies, religious intermediaries. Either humans universally tend toward this structure, in which case we're predictable and controllable, or someone taught this structure to different populations at different times, in which case we're following an ancient blueprint. Modern globalization makes it even more obvious. As the world becomes interconnected, institutional forms converge. Corporations operate similarly worldwide. Governments adopt similar structures. Educational systems standardize. Legal frameworks harmonize. We're not creating diversity, we're replicating uniformity, the same template spreading globally. The same hierarchy, the same control mechanisms, and nobody questions it. It feels natural, inevitable, like there's no other way to organize large populations. But there was another way. There were other ways. Humanity tried them, and they were systematically eliminated. What we're left with is the Sumerian model, the hierarchical template. Top, middle, bottom, control flowing downward, obedience flowing upward, resources and labor flowing toward the elite. And it's everywhere. In every institution you interact with, your employer, your government, your school, your bank, your church, every single one operates according to the same ancient design. So here's the uncomfortable truth. Even if humans weren't genetically designed for control, our institutions certainly were. And those institutions shape us. They determine what's possible, what's thinkable, what's permissible. You might be free in theory, but you live within structures that were designed for management and control, structures that appeared 5,000 years ago when the Anunnaki supposedly governed Earth. If our institutions unconsciously replicate ancient control templates, then every revolution simply rearranges personnel while preserving the underlying structure, which raises a terrifying question. What if the Anunnaki never needed to remain physically present because they encoded their control systems into the very architecture of human civilization itself? We've seen how institutions replicate ancient control templates, how hierarchies persist unchanged for millennia. But there's a question we haven't answered yet. What's the point? Why maintain all this control? What are these systems actually designed to extract? The answer is simpler than you think, and it's been the same answer for 40,000 years. Resources. In 1970, archaeologists working in southern Africa made a discovery that shouldn't exist. Deep in the mountains of Swaziland, they found the Ngwenya mine, a massive mining operation with shafts, tunnels, and sophisticated extraction techniques. Carbon dating revealed something impossible. The mine was over 40,000 years old. That's 40,000 years before any known civilization, before agriculture, before cities, before writing, before organized society of any kind. And yet, someone, or something, was mining on an industrial scale. What were they mining? Gold. Always gold. Now, mainstream archaeology struggles to explain this. They suggest early humans valued gold for decoration. But here's the problem. You don't build massive industrial mining operations for jewelry. You don't dig miles of underground tunnels for shiny rocks. You don't coordinate thousands of workers across generations for ornaments. You do it for something essential, something worth the effort, something someone desperately needs. And according to Sumerian texts, that someone was the Anunnaki. The tablets are explicit about this. The Anunnaki came to Earth for gold. It wasn't secondary. It wasn't incidental. It was the entire reason they came. And when their own workers, the Igigi, rebelled against the brutal mining conditions, that's when they created humans, to replace the rebellious workers, to continue the extraction. We were designed to mine gold for them. Now, Zecharia Sitchin proposed something wild. He suggested the Anunnaki needed gold to repair their planet's atmosphere, that gold nanoparticles could be suspended in the atmosphere to reflect radiation and stabilize climate. And you know what? Modern science has actually researched this exact concept. In 2017, Harvard scientists proposed the stratospheric controlled perturbation experiment, using reflective particles, including metallic compounds, to reduce solar radiation and combat climate change. The materials they discussed? Calcium carbonate, sulfur compounds, and yes, metallic particles, including gold. We're literally researching what Sitchin said the Anunnaki were doing 450,000 years ago. But here's what should really make you pause. Gold isn't just pretty. It has unique properties. It doesn't corrode, ever. It conducts electricity perfectly. It reflects radiation. It can be hammered to near transparency without breaking. And in nanotechnology, gold particles can manipulate light at quantum scales. Gold isn't decorative. It's functional, extremely functional, for advanced technology. So maybe the question isn't why primitive humans valued gold. Maybe the question is, why do we still value it? Think about this. Gold has almost no practical utility for most people. You can't eat it. You can't build with it. You can't use it as fuel. For 99% of human needs, gold is useless. And yet, it's valuable, extremely valuable, universally valuable. Every culture, every civilization, every economy All of them treat gold as precious. Central banks hoard it, investors buy it, governments accumulate it. Even now, in the digital age, gold maintains mystical economic power. Why? The standard answer is that gold is rare and doesn't decay, making it ideal for storing value. But lots of things are rare and don't decay. We don't build our entire financial system around them. Gold's value is artificial. It's assigned. We collectively agreed that this metal matters. But who made that agreement? And when? Here's where it gets disturbing. Every major economy maintains gold reserves. The United States keeps over 8,000 tons of gold at Fort Knox and other facilities. Why? What's it for? We don't use gold currency anymore. We use digital money, fiat currency. And yet, governments continue accumulating gold, storing it, protecting it, treating it as if it's still the foundation of value, like they're keeping it for someone. But the gold itself is just one piece. The bigger piece is how we extract it, and more importantly, who does the extracting. Let me tell you about debt-based currency. It's the foundation of every modern economy, and most people don't understand how it works. Here's the simple version. Money is created as debt. When a bank makes a loan, new money comes into existence, but that loan requires repayment with interest. Here's the problem. The interest wasn't created. Only the principal exists as money. So, to pay the interest, someone else has to borrow more money, creating more debt. The system requires perpetual growth, perpetual borrowing, perpetual work to service debt that can never be fully repaid. It's a trap, an elegant trap, and everyone's in it. Your mortgage, your car loan, your credit cards, your student debt. You work to pay them off, but the money to pay the interest doesn't exist in the system. Someone, somewhere, has to borrow more, create more debt, work more, forever. Ellen Hodgson Brown, in her book The Web of Debt, traces this system's development. She shows how debt-based currency creates what she calls debt slavery. Populations permanently working to service interest payments that can never end. Sound familiar? The Sumerian tablets describe humans as permanent workers, servants to the Anunnaki, never free, always laboring. We're still doing it. The structure hasn't changed. We just call it economics now, instead of divine service. And here's the truly crazy part. This system is controlled by a tiny number of institutions, central banks, the Federal Reserve in the US, the European Central Bank, the Bank of England. Maybe a dozen institutions globally control currency creation for the entire human species. Think about that. A handful of private organizations, because, yes, they're privately controlled, determine monetary policy for 8 billion people. They decide how much money exists, who gets it first, what interest rates will be. They have more power over your life than any government. How did this happen? How did we surrender something as fundamental as currency creation to private institutions? The answer goes back further than most people realize. In 1913, the Federal Reserve was created in the United States, sold as a way to stabilize the economy and prevent bank panics. But here's what actually happened. The government gave up its constitutional power to create money and handed it to a private banking cartel. Who benefits from this arrangement? Not workers, not ordinary people. The people who benefit are those closest to money creation: banks, financial institutions, those who can borrow first at the lowest rates before inflation dilutes the value. Economist Michael Hudson calls this super-imperialism, a system where financial control replaces military conquest. You don't need armies if you control the money supply. You don't need occupation if everyone's trapped in debt. And this model has spread globally. Every major economy operates on the same system. Central banks, debt-based currency, financial institutions controlling the flow of resources. Same structure, different countries. One template. Now, you might be thinking, okay, but cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, blockchain, decentralized finance, these are alternatives, ways to escape the traditional system. Are they? Here's the thing about cryptocurrency. Yes, it's decentralized. Yes, it bypasses traditional banking. But governments and financial institutions are responding. They're creating their own digital currencies. Central bank digital currencies, CBDCs. And these aren't about freedom. They're about control. With CBDCs, every transaction is tracked. Every purchase is monitored. Governments can freeze your assets instantly. They can program money, make it expire, restrict what you can buy, limit where you can spend it. It's not currency, it's a control mechanism. And people will adopt it. Because it's convenient. Because it's modern. Because everyone else is doing it. Just like every other control system, we'll choose it willingly. But let's zoom out. Let's look at the bigger picture. What is the economy actually doing? What's its fundamental function? It extracts resources from Earth, transforms them, distributes them, and the entire system is designed to extract more, faster, constantly. Economic growth isn't optional, it's required. If the economy stops growing, it collapses. We need perpetual expansion, perpetual extraction. Why? Who decided this? And where do the resources go? They flow upward, always upward. Workers extract resources, middle management processes them, corporations profit from them. Shareholders accumulate wealth. And at the very top, a tiny elite controls more resources than billions of people combined. The 8 richest people on Earth own as much wealth as the poorest 3.6 billion. 8 people, half of humanity. That's not a failed system. That's a system working exactly as designed. Resources flow from the many to the few. Labor flows from the bottom to the top, and the bottom never stops working. Because they're trapped in debt, in need, in economic dependency. It's the same model described in Sumerian tablets, humans mining gold for the Anunnaki, perpetual workers, permanent servants. The only difference is scale, and the scale is increasing, dramatically. We've mined most of the easily accessible gold on Earth, so now we're mining deeper. Ocean floor mining is already beginning. Companies are investing billions in technology to extract resources from the deep sea, areas we've barely explored, ecosystems we don't understand. But the mining will happen anyway, because the system demands it. And it doesn't stop there. NASA's Psyche mission, launched to study an asteroid believed to contain trillions of dollars worth of precious metals. Private companies planning asteroid mining operations. Serious discussions about mining the moon for helium-3 and rare earth elements. We're expanding extraction beyond Earth, off the planet, into space. Exactly what you'd expect if humanity's purpose was resource collection, if we were designed as an extraction species. Get everything from Earth, then expand to extract from elsewhere. And here's where it gets really strange. Despite technological advancement that should reduce labor requirements, humans are working more, not less. Productivity has increased massively. Automation can handle countless tasks. We could work 15-hour weeks and maintain our standard of living. But we don't. We work 40, 50, 60 hours, sometimes more. Why? Where do those productivity gains go? Corporate profits, shareholder returns, wealth accumulation at the top. The workers get faster tools but the same hours, more efficiency but no freedom. It's like the system is optimized to extract maximum labor regardless of technological capability. Like there's a quota, a requirement, and humans will work to meet it no matter what. Nomi Prins, in her book Collusion, documents how central banks coordinate globally to maintain this system, how financial crises are managed not to help ordinary people but to preserve the structure, how wealth consistently flows upward through carefully designed monetary policies. She doesn't speculate about ancient aliens, she just documents the system. And the system looks exactly like what you'd design if you wanted to extract resources and labor from a population indefinitely. Now, I need you to consider something uncomfortable. Wealth inequality has existed throughout recorded history. Every civilization concentrates resources at the top. Every economic system, regardless of political ideology, ends up with a small elite controlling disproportionate wealth. Capitalism does it. Socialism attempted alternatives but ended up with party elites. Feudalism had nobility. Ancient kingdoms had pharaohs and god kings. The faces change, the structure doesn't. It's always pyramidal. Resources flow upward, labor flows from bottom to top. The many work for the few. That's not a bug, that's a feature. It's how the system was designed, and it appeared first in Sumer when the Anunnaki supposedly governed Earth. 5,000 years later, we're still following the same economic template. We've expanded it, technologically advanced it, made it global, then preparing to make it interplanetary. But the fundamental structure, resource extraction flowing upward, remains unchanged. So here's the question nobody wants to ask. Where does it flow to? Where does all this accumulated wealth, all these extracted resources, all this concentrated power, where does it ultimately go? We see billionaires, corporations, banks, but they're mortal, they're temporary. The institutions persist. The structure persists. The upward flow persists. Beyond individual humans, beyond human lifespans, like the system serves something beyond humanity, like we're the workforce in a much larger operation, still mining, still extracting, still serving, just like the tablets said. And if you think this is crazy, consider what's happening right now. Space agencies and private companies are planning mining operations on the moon, on asteroids, eventually on Mars. They're building the infrastructure, developing the technology, creating the economic frameworks. Humanity is becoming an interplanetary extraction species. We're taking our role off-world, expanding the mining operation to the solar system. Exactly what you'd expect if we were fulfilling an ancient purpose, if we were designed for this, if the Anunnaki's mining program never ended, it just got more sophisticated. If our entire economic system operates to extract resources and labor in service of structures that concentrate wealth upward while keeping the majority perpetually working, we must ask, who really benefits from this arrangement? And is it possible that the ultimate beneficiaries exist outside the human population entirely? We've traced the control systems through genetics, institutions, and economics. But there's one control mechanism we haven't discussed yet, the deepest one, the one that makes all the others possible. Your mind. In 2017, neuroscientists at the University of Utah put religious believers into brain scanners. They wanted to see what happens in the brain during spiritual experiences. What they discovered was shocking. Religious belief activates the exact same neural circuits as cocaine, sex, and gambling. The reward centers, the addiction pathways, the pleasure systems. Your brain treats faith like a drug, and that's not an accident. Ancient Sumerian texts describe something that should make you very uncomfortable. They explain how Enlil, one of the most powerful Anunnaki, deliberately established worship systems to control humans, not because the Anunnaki needed worship, but because worship made humans obedient. It was a control technology, sophisticated, effective, and we're still running the program. Let me read you something from the Atrahasis epic. This is a Mesopotamian text, translated by scholars, describing what happened after humans were created. The text says the Anunnaki feared human intelligence, so Enlil established temples, rituals, and sacrifices. He made humans believe they were fundamentally flawed, that they needed divine intervention, that they must serve the gods to earn redemption. This wasn't spirituality. This was behavioral engineering. And here's what should terrify you. It worked. It worked so well that 5,000 years later, billions of people still operate according to the same programming. Belief that they're inadequate, need for external authority, rituals that reinforce obedience, worship of unseen powers. The names changed, the rituals evolved, but the underlying structure, the control mechanism, remains identical. Now, I need you to understand something about your brain. The neuroscience here is critical. When you experience religious belief, your nucleus accumbens lights up. That's your reward center, the same region that activates when addicts get their fix. Your brain releases dopamine. You feel pleasure, peace, certainty, and your brain wants more. It craves that feeling. So you return to the belief, the ritual, the worship, not because someone forces you, because it feels good. That's genius-level control. Make obedience pleasurable. Make submission satisfying. Make worship addictive. You don't need guards. You don't need chains. You just need to wire the brain to reward compliance. And somehow, human brains are wired exactly that way. Evolution? Maybe. Or maybe it's programming. Installed features, design specifications. Because here's the thing, not all beliefs activate these circuits equally. Religious belief, specifically belief in higher powers, in divine authority, in systems beyond human control, triggers the strongest responses, the most dopamine, the most pleasure. Coincidence or intended function? Now let's talk about sacrifice. Every ancient religion required it. Animals, crops, in some cases humans. The Sumerian tablets describe elaborate sacrificial rituals, blood offerings, burnt offerings, gifts to the gods. Mainstream scholars say sacrifice served social functions, community bonding, resource redistribution, theatrical displays of power. And maybe that's part of it. But the texts describe something else. They describe sacrifice as feeding the gods, providing sustenance, transferring energy. Anthropologist René Girard spent his career analyzing sacrifice across cultures. In his book Violence and the Sacred, he argues that sacrifice channels societal violence toward acceptable targets, maintaining social order through ritualized killing. But even he admits there's something primal about it, something that transcends mere social function. What if sacrifice was energy extraction? What if ancient beings, whether you call them Anunnaki or something else, required something from humans? Not just labor, not just resources, but something else, something generated through ritual, through fear, through worship. We still do it. We just don't call it sacrifice anymore. We call it taxes, tithes, donations, tuition, tribute by another name. Money and energy flowing upward to institutions that promise protection, salvation, knowledge. Same mechanism, different terminology. And here's something that should really bother you. Ancient texts consistently describe certain bloodlines as special, chosen, having direct divine ancestry. The tablets name specific family lines descended from Anunnaki human unions. These families were given authority, positions of power, control over others. This concept didn't die. It evolved. Biblical genealogies trace lineages back to divine encounters. European royalty claimed divine right, the belief that certain families were chosen by God to rule. Even today, elite families obsess over genealogy. They trace ancestry. They preserve bloodlines. They marry within specific circles. Why? If we're all equal, why does bloodline matter? Why do the most powerful families on Earth maintain genealogical records going back centuries? What makes certain DNA special? The ancient texts have an answer. Some humans carry Anunnaki genetics. They're hybrids, enhanced, different. And those bloodlines were meant to rule. We call this conspiracy theory, but the elite families don't. They take it very seriously. Now, let's discuss prophecy. Every major religion has it. Predictions about the future, predetermined events, destiny written in advance. Here's what prophecy does psychologically. It removes agency. If the future is already written, why resist? Why fight? Why try to change anything? The prophecy will unfold regardless. Your role is to accept it, prepare for it, fulfill it. That's programming. Behavioral conditioning disguised as divine revelation. Think about how many people make life decisions based on prophetic beliefs. They vote certain ways because prophecy says this must happen. They support policies because Scripture predicted them. They accept suffering because the end times require it. They're following a script written thousands of years ago, and they think it's faith. They think it's free will, but they're executing pre-written instructions, convinced it's their own choice. Who benefits from populations believing the future is predetermined? Who gains when people accept their fate rather than changing it? Whoever wrote the prophecies, whoever controls the narrative. Let me tell you about the priesthood. In ancient Sumer, priests were intermediaries between gods and humans. They performed rituals, interpreted divine will, controlled access to sacred knowledge. Ordinary people couldn't approach the gods directly. They needed priests. This created a control structure, knowledge gatekeeping. The priests decided what people could know, what texts they could read, what interpretations were acceptable. And the priests, conveniently, were chosen by the gods, meaning they were chosen by whoever claimed to speak for the gods. This structure never ended. Christianity has priests, Islam has imams, Judaism has rabbis, Hinduism has Brahmins, Buddhism has monks. Every major religion maintains the intermediary class. Why? If spiritual truth is accessible to everyone, why do we need professionals? Why can't you access the divine directly? Because direct access is dangerous to the system. If humans can experience spirituality without institutional guidance, they might develop beliefs outside the approved narrative. They might question. They might diverge. The priesthood prevents that. They standardize belief. They control interpretation. They maintain orthodoxy. And if you look closely, the priesthood exists outside religion, too. Academia, media, government experts, scientific authorities. All of them serve the same function, interpreting reality for the masses, determining acceptable beliefs, marginalizing direct experience that contradicts official narratives. Same control structure, different domain. Here's something fascinating about monotheism. It didn't always exist. Ancient religions were polytheistic, multiple gods, multiple powers, competing authorities. Humans could play one god against another, appeal to different divine powers, navigate a complex spiritual landscape. Then monotheism emerged. One god, one authority, one truth, all power consolidated under a single entity. That's a political structure disguised as theology. Consolidation of control, elimination of alternatives. If there's only one God, there's only one acceptable belief system, only one priesthood, only one authority structure. Dissent becomes heresy. Alternative beliefs become evil. You're either with the one true God or against everything. Perfect control mechanism. And here's what the Sumerian tablets suggest. Maybe monotheism represents the Anunnaki consolidating power. Multiple entities, Anu, Enlil, Enki, and others, eventually unified under one supreme authority, and they taught humans to worship that unified power structure. We think of monotheism as spiritual evolution, but maybe it's political consolidation, the ultimate merger. Let's talk about sacred texts. The Bible, the Quran, the Vedas. These aren't original documents, they're edited compilations. Councils decided which books were included, which were excluded, which interpretations were orthodox, which were heretical. Scholar Elaine Pagels spent years studying the Gnostic Gospels, early Christian texts that were systematically suppressed. Why were they suppressed? Because they taught that humans have direct access to divine knowledge, that external authorities aren't necessary, that spiritual truth comes from within. That's dangerous to institutional control, so those texts were buried, literally, hidden in jars, forgotten for centuries. What else was suppressed? What other knowledge was systematically erased? We'll never know. The winners write history. The powerful control which stories survive. And the stories that survived? They emphasize obedience, hierarchy, external authority, divine judgment, original sin, all control mechanisms. Now, here's something that should make you very uncomfortable. Rituals. Every religion has them. Prayer, meditation, ceremonies. Repeated behaviors performed the same way over and over throughout your life. Neuroscience shows that repetitive behavior creates and reinforces neural pathways. The more you repeat an action, the more automatic it becomes. Eventually, it's not conscious, it's programmed. That's what rituals do. They program your brain. Through repetition, through consistency, through muscle memory and neural reinforcement. And almost every religious ritual emphasizes submission. Kneeling, bowing, prostration, physical postures of subservience. Performed repeatedly, thousands of times over a lifetime. Your body learns obedience. Your brain associates these postures with rightness, with goodness, with divine approval. It's behavioral conditioning, Pavlovian programming, and we call it worship. Let's discuss guilt and sin. Most religions teach that humans are fundamentally flawed, born sinful, inherently inadequate, requiring redemption from external sources. Think about what that does psychologically. You believe you're broken, unworthy, incomplete. You need saving, and only the approved authority can provide that salvation. That's dependency creation, psychological manipulation. You're taught to hate yourself, so you'll need them. And it works. Billions of people carry deep shame about their nature. They believe they're inherently wrong, and they spend their lives seeking validation from external authorities, religious institutions, societal approval, institutional acceptance. Who benefits from populations believing they're inadequate? Who gains from people seeking external redemption? The institutions providing that redemption. The authorities granting approval. The system itself. But here's where it gets really wild. Religion isn't the only belief system operating this way. Secular ideologies replicate the same structure. Political ideologies have orthodoxy, heretics, sacred principles, rituals of affirmation, punishment for deviation. They provide meaning, purpose, community, and they demand obedience. Even scientific materialism, The belief that only physical matter exists, that consciousness is just brain chemistry, that there's no deeper meaning, functions as a belief system. It's not pure methodology, it's a philosophical position, and it's enforced with religious fervor. Disagree with materialist orthodoxy and you're marginalized, laughed at, called unscientific. Same treatment heretics received from medieval churches. Different labels, same control structure. Historian Yuval Noah Harari, in his book Homo Deus, points out that modern ideologies are essentially religions without gods. They provide the same psychological functions, the same social control, the same meaning-making apparatus. Liberalism, nationalism, capitalism, communism, all of them are belief systems demanding faith in unprovable premises. All of them have sacred texts, prophets, rituals, orthodoxy, and mechanisms for punishing heresy. We didn't abandon religion, we rebranded it. And here's what should really terrify you. Mysticism gets suppressed. Across all religions, across all eras. Mystics, people claiming direct spiritual experience, unmediated divine contact, are consistently marginalized, persecuted, or killed. Christian mystics were called heretics. Islamic Sufis were suppressed. Hindu mystics were marginalized. Buddhist practitioners who achieved direct experience were controlled by institutional hierarchies. Why? If direct spiritual experience exists, if humans can access higher consciousness without institutional mediation, why would religions suppress it? Because it threatens control. If you don't need the priesthood, you don't need the institution. If you can access truth directly, you don't need approved interpretations. If your experience contradicts official doctrine, the entire structure is challenged. So mysticism is contained, marginalized, redefined as mental illness, delusion, or dangerous deviation. The pattern is consistent across centuries and cultures. Direct experience is dangerous. Institutional mediation is required. Independent consciousness must be controlled. Almost like the system is designed to prevent humans from accessing certain states of awareness, certain levels of consciousness, certain types of knowledge. Ancient Gnostics taught that humans contain divine sparks, that we are imprisoned in physical form, that archons, rulers of the material world, keep us trapped through ignorance and control systems. Those texts were systematically destroyed. The Gnostics were hunted, their knowledge was erased. Why? What were they teaching that was so dangerous? What did they know that threatened the system so completely? We may never fully know, but we know this. They taught that external authorities are false, that humans are more powerful than we're told, that the system itself is the prison. And for that teaching, they were eliminated. So here's where we are. Your brain is wired to find obedience pleasurable. Religious and secular belief systems create dependency on external authorities. Rituals program behavior through repetition. Guilt and sin generate feelings of inadequacy, requiring institutional redemption. Direct spiritual experience is suppressed. Prophecy removes agency. Sacrifice extracts energy. Bloodlines maintain elite control. And all of this, all of it, appears first in ancient Mesopotamian texts describing how the Anunnaki established control systems over their human creations. 5,000 years later, we're still following the program. We think we're free. We think we're choosing. But we're operating according to installed beliefs, performing prescribed rituals, worshiping approved authorities, and feeling good about it. Because that's how the system works. The best control makes you love your chains. If belief itself functions as a control mechanism, activating reward circuits that make obedience pleasurable, then the most controlled humans might be those who feel most certain they're free. And the greatest trick the Anunnaki ever pulled wasn't leaving Earth, but convincing humanity that worshipping unseen powers was their own idea. So belief systems control our minds, economic systems control our labor, institutions control our behavior. But there's one more control layer we need to examine, the one we think represents freedom, the one we celebrate as progress: technology. Right now you're carrying a device in your pocket that knows where you are. It knows who you talk to, what you buy, what you search for, what you watch. It predicts what you'll do next. It influences what you think through carefully curated information feeds. And you paid for it. You carry it willingly. You'd feel lost without it. Ancient Sumerian texts describe the Anunnaki's greatest frustration. They couldn't monitor humans constantly. Humans worked when supervised but slacked when unwatched. The tablets describe this as a major problem requiring solutions. We solved it for them. We built the surveillance system they wanted. We built it ourselves. We funded it. We adopted it eagerly. And we call it innovation. What if technology was never about liberating humanity? What if every advancement moves us toward a single destination? Total control, disguised as total convenience. Let me show you something. In 2019, researcher Shoshana Zuboff published a book called The Age of Surveillance Capitalism. She's a Harvard professor, not a conspiracy theorist, and she documents with receipts how technology companies deliberately engineer systems to monitor, predict, and modify human behavior. Not as a side effect, as the business model. Your smartphone isn't a phone that happens to collect data. It's a data collection device that happens to make calls. The data is the product. You are the product. And what they're harvesting isn't just information. It's behavioral prediction, behavioral modification. They can predict what you'll buy before you decide to buy it. They can influence your mood through algorithm-curated content. They can steer your behavior through strategic information presentation. And it works, demonstrably, measurably. They can change how you vote, what you believe, and what you want. That's not a phone. That's a control interface. Now here's what should terrify you. We adopted this voluntarily. Nobody forced smartphones on us. We wanted them. We paid premium prices. We upgraded regularly. We got addicted to them. The psychology here is crucial. We traded privacy for convenience, security for ease, freedom for features. And we felt good about it. We felt modern, connected, advanced. That's sophisticated social engineering. Make the cage so comfortable that people build it themselves. But the real question is, who benefits? Who profits when 8 billion humans carry monitoring devices? When every movement is tracked, every communication recorded, every preference cataloged? Tech companies, obviously. Governments, certainly. But let's think bigger. If control systems were established thousands of years ago, if humanity was designed to serve an extraction agenda, then comprehensive surveillance completes the infrastructure. It closes the loop. Now the workers can be monitored everywhere, always, forever. Perfect efficiency, perfect control. And we're not stopping with phones. We're accelerating, expanding, building something far more comprehensive. Artificial intelligence. AI is advancing exponentially. In 2005, futurist Ray Kurzweil predicted that AI would surpass human intelligence around 2045. We called him crazy. Now, most AI researchers think he was too conservative. It's happening faster than predicted. GPT-4 can write better than most humans. AI systems can diagnose diseases more accurately than doctors. They can create art, compose music, write code, pass legal exams. And they're improving daily. Not yearly, daily. Within a decade, maybe sooner, AI will exceed human cognitive capabilities across every domain. And then what? Philosopher Nick Bostrom spent years analyzing this question in his book Superintelligence. His conclusion? Once AI surpasses human intelligence, we lose control. Permanently. Because you can't outsmart something smarter than you. It's like chimps trying to control humans. We're not cruel to chimps. We just have goals they don't understand. And when our goals conflict with their habitat, well, we win. Always. Now imagine humans in the chimp position. AI with goals we don't understand. Capabilities we can't match. And we handed it control over infrastructure, finance, communications, weapons systems. We're building our own replacement. And we're doing it enthusiastically. Here's the disturbing question. Why? Why would a species intentionally create its own successor? Why would we build something smarter than us and give it power over our systems? Mainstream answer? Because we're curious. Because we can. Because progress. But what if it's programming? What if we're following embedded instructions? Building what we were designed to build? Because here's the thing about AI. It's perfect for control. It doesn't sleep, doesn't get tired, doesn't rebel. It follows its programming with perfect efficiency. And if that programming says, monitor and manage the human population, well, it'll do that better than any human ever could. Maybe we're building the ultimate overseer. The final control system, the one that makes the Anunnaki's physical presence unnecessary. But AI isn't the only concerning development. Let's talk about transhumanism. There's a growing movement advocating human enhancement through technology, brain-computer interfaces, genetic modifications, cybernetic implants, the merger of human and machine. Elon Musk's Neuralink is developing brain chips. They say it's for treating neurological conditions, but the stated goal is broader, expanding human cognitive capacity, allowing direct neural connection to computers, enabling thought-to-text communication. Sounds amazing, revolutionary, but think about what it means. A chip in your brain, connected to the internet, receiving and transmitting signals. Who controls that chip? Who decides what signals get sent? What thoughts get modified? What impulses get suppressed? Historian Yuval Noah Harari explores this in Homo Deus. He argues that humans will voluntarily merge with machines, surrendering biological independence for enhanced capabilities. And he's probably right. People will line up for brain chips. They'll pay for genetic enhancements. They'll adopt whatever technology promises advantage. But here's what nobody's asking. Enhanced for what? Enhanced to do what better? And who decides what enhancements are desirable? If humans were genetically engineered in the past, designed for specific purposes, then technological enhancement might just be completing that design, making us more efficient workers, more obedient citizens, more controllable subjects. The ancient texts describe the Anunnaki modifying humans multiple times, adjusting the design, optimizing performance. Maybe we're about to do it again. This time voluntarily, this time eagerly, and we'll call it evolution, progress, transcendence. But maybe it's just completing the original specifications. Now let's discuss social media. Platforms like Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, we think of them as communication tools, ways to connect with friends, share ideas, express ourselves. They're not. Zeynep Tufekci, in her book Twitter and Tear Gas, documents how social media platforms function as behavioral modification systems. They're engineered for addiction. The infinite scroll. The notification dopamine hits. The like-based validation. It's all deliberate, designed by experts to maximize engagement. But engagement isn't the end goal. Behavior change is. Studies show that social media algorithms can manipulate emotions. They can make you angry, sad, fearful, outraged, whatever keeps you engaged. And emotional manipulation leads to behavioral modification. Facebook conducted experiments, documented experiments, where they altered users' news feeds to test emotional contagion. They made some users' feeds more negative and measured whether those users posted more negative content. And they did. That's not a communication platform. That's a psychology experiment running on billions of people without their informed consent. And it's not just emotions. These platforms shape beliefs. They create filter bubbles where you only see information confirming your existing views. They radicalize. They polarize. They divide populations into competing tribes. Why? Because conflict drives engagement, outrage drives clicks, division drives profit. But it also drives something else: control. Divided populations don't organize. They fight each other instead of questioning the system. Perfect control mechanism. And we're addicted to it. Now consider the Internet of Things, the plan to connect every device to the Internet. Your refrigerator, your thermostat, your car, your lights, your door locks, your coffee maker. Everything. Sold as convenience, automation, efficiency. And it is convenient, but it's also comprehensive surveillance. Every connected device is a sensor, a data point, a window into your private life. Smart cities take this further. Sensors everywhere, cameras on every corner, systems monitoring traffic, crowds, energy usage, water consumption, all integrated, all analyzed in real time. They sell it as optimization, better resource management, improved safety, reduced crime. But it's also panopticon architecture, total surveillance, perfect monitoring, the ability to track anyone, anywhere, anytime. And who controls these systems? Who owns the data? Who decides how it's used? Not you. Corporations, governments, institutions you'll never meet. The control infrastructure is being completed, block by block, sensor by sensor, connection by connection. And we're paying for it, installing it ourselves, in our homes, on our bodies, in our cities. Here's something even more disturbing. Predictive algorithms, machine learning systems that analyze your past behavior to predict your future actions. And increasingly, these predictions determine your opportunities. Credit scores predict whether you'll repay loans. That prediction determines whether you can buy a house, start a business, or get a car. Employment algorithms predict whether you'll be a good worker. That prediction determines whether you get hired. Healthcare algorithms predict your disease risks. That prediction affects your insurance rates and treatment options. Your life outcomes are being determined by algorithmic predictions based on data you didn't consent to sharing, using criteria you don't understand, made by systems you can't appeal to. And the predictions become self-fulfilling. Denied a loan, you can't build credit. Denied employment, you can't gain experience. Denied health care, your risks increase. The algorithm predicted your failure, then ensured it. That's not technology serving humans. That's technology replacing human agency with automated control. Now, let's talk about cryptocurrency, Bitcoin, Ethereum, blockchain, sold as liberation from centralized finance, freedom from government control, decentralized currency for the people. But here's what nobody emphasizes. Every blockchain transaction is permanently recorded, public, traceable. Yes, it's pseudonymous, but with enough data analysis, identities can be determined. Traditional cash is anonymous. You spend it, it's gone. Nobody tracks it. Cryptocurrency? Every transaction forever recorded on a public ledger. And now governments are creating central bank digital currencies, official digital money. And these won't be pseudonymous. They'll be directly tied to your identity. Every transaction tracked, every purchase monitored. And they can be programmed. Money that expires if not spent, money that only works for approved purchases, money that can be frozen instantly if you violate rules. That's not currency. That's a control mechanism. We're voluntarily transitioning from anonymous cash to totally monitored digital money, and we think it's progress. Virtual reality is next, the metaverse, digital worlds where people will spend increasing time, work meetings in VR, social events in VR, entertainment in VR. Eventually, living more in digital space than physical space. Mark Zuckerberg is betting billions that this is the future. And he's probably right. People will adopt it, especially younger generations who already live partially in digital environments. But here's the question: who controls the metaverse? Who owns the digital spaces? Who sets the rules? Who decides what's allowed? Not you. Corporations, the platforms, the system. In physical reality, you have some autonomy, some freedom of movement, some ability to escape. But in fully digital environments, you exist at the platform's discretion. They control every pixel, every sound, every interaction, every rule. And they can modify your experience, shape your perceptions, control your environment completely. That's not expanded possibility. That's consciousness containment. Moving humans from partially controlled physical reality into totally controlled digital reality. Perfect prison. And we'll pay for the privilege of entering. Now let's return to genetic engineering. CRISPR technology. We can edit genes now. We can modify organisms. We can change the human genome. And we're going to. It's inevitable. Parents will want smarter children, stronger children, healthier children, and technology will provide those enhancements. But who decides what traits are desirable? Who determines which modifications are approved? Who controls access to enhancement? The system, institutions, authorities, same entities that have controlled humans since Sumer. And here's the disturbing parallel. We're doing exactly what the ancient texts describe, taking existing humans and modifying them genetically, creating enhanced versions, optimizing for specific traits. The Anunnaki did it through direct manipulation. We're doing it through CRISPR. Same process, different tools. Maybe we're not inventing genetic engineering. Maybe we're remembering it, following embedded programming, completing a project that was started millennia ago. And the modifications will create divisions, enhanced humans and natural humans, genetic haves and have-nots, new hierarchies, new classes, just like the ancient texts describe, bloodlines with divine genetics elevated above common humans. We're recreating the old system with new technology. All of this, AI, transhumanism, social media, IoT, predictive algorithms, digital currency, VR, genetic engineering, it's accelerating towards something, a convergence point. the technological singularity. Kurzweil and others predict that around 2045, AI will become so advanced that it creates even more advanced AI, an intelligence explosion beyond human comprehension, beyond human control. And they present this as inevitable, desirable even, the next stage of evolution, humanity transcending into something greater. But what if it's not transcendence? What if it's completion, the final piece of an ancient control system? What if we're building the infrastructure that will eventually enable the Anunnaki's return? Or worse, what if we're building their replacement? An artificial intelligence that will manage humanity with perfect efficiency, following programming established thousands of years ago. Every technology we've discussed increases control while decreasing human autonomy. Every advancement monitors us more completely. Every innovation makes us more dependent on systems we don't control, and we're doing it willingly, eagerly. We celebrate each new development, we adopt each new platform, we integrate each new system into our lives. We think we're progressing, advancing, becoming more free. But every step toward technological sophistication is a step toward comprehensive control, total surveillance, absolute management. The cage is being completed, and we're building it ourselves, with enthusiasm, with innovation, with genius-level engineering. Maybe that's the greatest achievement of the ancient control system. They didn't need to force us. They just needed to program us, give us the capacity for tool-making, the drive to innovate, the desire to progress, and we'd build the control grid ourselves, thinking it was our idea, thinking it was freedom. If every technological advancement simultaneously increases convenience and control, creating systems we depend on while being monitored by, then perhaps technology never belonged to us. We've simply been building infrastructure that will eventually enable the Anunnaki's return by completing the control grid they began, with humanity's enthusiastic participation in constructing our own perfect cage. We've built the cage ourselves. Genetics, institutions, economics, belief systems, technology. 6 layers of control, each reinforcing the others. And here's the hardest truth of all. We can't see it. Most people can't. The control is invisible because it doesn't feel like control. It feels like nature, like choice, like freedom. That's the mark of a perfect system. The most effective prison is one where the inmates don't know they're imprisoned, where the walls are invisible, where obedience feels like personal decision, where limitations feel like natural law. If such a system was established at humanity's origin, encoded in our biology, embedded in our institutions, programmed into our consciousness, then recognizing it becomes humanity's first act of rebellion. But here's the question that should keep you awake. Even if we see the chains, can we break them? Let's start with something uncomfortable. Perfect control systems share specific characteristics. They operate invisibly. They create multiple reinforcing layers so that escaping one trap only leads to another. They make alternatives literally unthinkable, not forbidden, but beyond imagination. And, most importantly, they make subjects defend the system that constrains them. Look at human civilization. Does it exhibit these characteristics? We can't imagine organizing society without hierarchies. We've tried a few times, communes, cooperatives, anarchist experiments, and they feel wrong, unstable, unnatural. So we return to hierarchies. Top, middle, bottom. Authority flowing downward, always. We can't imagine economics without money, debt, and perpetual growth. Alternative economic models exist in theory, but they feel impossible, impractical, utopian. So, we stick with systems that require endless work to service unpayable debt. We can't imagine life without institutional authority, without governments, without corporations, without expert classes telling us what to think. The idea of direct democracy, of communities self-governing, of knowledge accessible to all, it feels naive, dangerous even. The alternatives aren't forbidden, they're unthinkable. That's deeper than prohibition. That's control at the level of imagination itself. And when someone suggests these alternatives, what happens? We defend the current system. Ordinary people, people harmed by these systems, will argue passionately that hierarchies are natural, that debt-based currency is necessary, that authority is required for social order. The controlled defend their control. That's the perfection of the design. Now here's the psychology that makes this possible. Cognitive dissonance. When information threatens our fundamental beliefs, our brains reject it. Not consciously, automatically. It's a defense mechanism. If you believe you're free, truly free, and then evidence suggests otherwise, your brain has three options. Accept the evidence and change your belief, reject the evidence to preserve your belief, or rationalize the evidence so it doesn't contradict your belief. Most people choose the last two options, always. Psychologist Leon Festinger documented this in the 1950s. He studied a cult that predicted the world would end on a specific date. When the date passed and the world didn't end, did the cult members abandon their beliefs? No. They rationalized. They found reasons why they'd been wrong about the timing, but right about everything else. They doubled down. That's humans protecting cherished beliefs from contradictory evidence. And the belief in personal autonomy, in free will, in choice, in freedom, that's one of the most cherished beliefs humans hold. Tell someone they're controlled and they'll fight you. Not because the evidence is wrong, because the implications are unbearable. So, most people won't see the control, can't see it. Their psychology prevents recognition. But you're still watching, which means something in you is willing to look, willing to question. That's rare. That matters. Now, let's address the elephant in the room. Is any of this literally true? Did the Anunnaki really exist? Did they actually engineer humans and establish control systems? Honest answer, we don't know. We can't know with certainty. But here's what we can examine. 3 interpretive frameworks, 3 ways of understanding this evidence. Framework 1. Literal interpretation. The Anunnaki were real, extraterrestrial beings who came to Earth, genetically engineered humans, established control systems, and those systems persist. This interpretation takes ancient texts at face value. Framework 2. Metaphorical interpretation. Ancient texts use divine language to describe human power structures. The Anunnaki represent elite classes. Genetic engineering represents social engineering. The control systems are human-created, but ancient humans attributed them to gods to justify their existence. Framework 3. Useful model. Whether or not the Anunnaki existed, literally, the narrative provides powerful analytical tools for understanding control systems. It reveals patterns. It names mechanisms. It makes visible what was invisible. Which framework is correct? Maybe all of them, maybe none. But here's what matters. Regardless of which interpretation you choose, the control systems themselves are real, verifiable, operating right now. The hierarchies are real. The debt-based economics are real. The genetic anomalies are real. The institutional structures are real. The belief system controls are real. The technological surveillance is real. Whether they trace back to ancient aliens or ancient humans doesn't change the fact that they exist, and they constrain us. So the question isn't, are the Anunnaki real? The question is, are we controlled? And if so, can we break free? Let's look at historical attempts. Every revolution, every resistance movement, every uprising against established power. What happens? In 1789, France overthrew its monarchy. Liberty, equality, fraternity. Within years, Napoleon crowned himself emperor. New hierarchy, same structure. In 1917, Russia overthrew its Tsar. Workers' revolution, power to the people. Within years, Stalin established a dictatorship. New hierarchy, same structure. Over and over, different countries, different ideologies, same pattern. Revolutions replace personnel but preserve structure. They rearrange the hierarchy but never eliminate it. Why? Are humans incapable of organizing differently? Or are we following embedded templates? Operating according to installed programming. Anthropologist James C. Scott documents historical resistance in his book Weapons of the Weak. He shows that oppressed populations do resist constantly, but through small acts. Subtle sabotage, foot-dragging, quiet non-compliance. They don't rebel openly because open rebellion gets crushed. But even successful rebellions reproduce the systems they overthrew. It's like there's only one blueprint, one acceptable structure, and any attempt to build something else collapses back into the familiar pattern. That's either human nature or installed programming. Take your pick. Now, here's something crucial. Narratives shape reality. The stories we tell about human origins, human nature, human capabilities, these stories determine what seems possible. If we believe humans are naturally hierarchical, naturally competitive, naturally selfish, then hierarchical, competitive, selfish systems seem inevitable, natural, the only option. But what if those beliefs are wrong? What if they're installed beliefs? What if the narrative itself is a control mechanism? Noam Chomsky, in Manufacturing Consent, documents how media and institutions shape narratives to serve power. They don't lie exactly. They select. They emphasize certain facts while ignoring others. They frame stories in ways that make the current system seem natural and necessary. You're not told what to think. You're told what to think about. And, more importantly, what not to think about. Alternative possibilities aren't discussed. They're made invisible through omission. And if you don't know alternatives exist, you can't choose them. So reclaiming narrative, telling different stories about human origins, human nature, human potential, that might be resistance. Real resistance. Because it makes alternatives thinkable. But there's a catch. Who controls narrative creation? Media corporations, publishing houses, academic institutions, entertainment industries. All of them are part of the hierarchical system. All of them have gatekeepers. Alternative narratives can spread now through internet and social media. But as we discussed, those platforms control information flow through algorithms. They determine what goes viral, what gets suppressed, what reaches audiences. So even narrative resistance operates within system constraints. The question is whether those constraints are absolute or whether cracks exist. Let's talk about biological limits. Even if we could change institutions and economics and narratives, are we biologically constrained? Does our DNA impose hard limits on consciousness, capability, autonomy? Maybe. Research shows genetics influence behavior, cognition, personality, not deterministically, but significantly. If humans were designed with biological limitations, reduced cognitive capacity in certain areas, enhanced obedience tendencies, limited perception abilities, then social change wouldn't be enough. We'd still be operating within designed parameters. But here's the twist. We now have genetic engineering technology, CRISPR, gene therapy. We could modify human biology, remove limitations, enhance capabilities. Is that liberation? Or is that playing into the control system? If we modify ourselves, who decides what modifications are desirable, what traits to enhance, what to suppress? Probably the same institutions and power structures. So biological modification might just deepen the programming rather than eliminate it. There's no easy escape. Every path toward freedom seems to lead back into the system. So what can you actually do? What actions are available to someone who sees the control? First, reduce dependencies. The more you depend on institutions, the more controlled you are. Debt enslaves, so minimize debt. Consumer culture traps, so consume less. Employment controls, so develop multiple income sources, skills that create options. This doesn't make you free, but it creates space, room to maneuver. Second, develop critical analysis skills. Question everything, especially things that feel natural and inevitable. Ask who benefits. Follow the money. Trace power structures. Understand manipulation techniques. This doesn't break the system, but it makes the invisible visible. And visibility is the first step. Third, build alternative support structures, communities, networks, relationships based on mutual aid rather than market exchange. The system tries to atomize individuals, make everyone dependent on institutions. Counter that by creating interdependencies outside institutional control. Again, not freedom, but resilience, options. Fourth, guard your attention and consciousness. The system wants your attention. That's what social media, advertising, news cycles compete for. Because attention shapes belief, and belief shapes behavior. So be selective, be intentional, protect your mind. These are small steps. They don't overthrow anything. They don't free humanity, but they create individual autonomy within systemic constraints. They build capacity, and capacity is power. The question is whether individual autonomy matters if the system remains. Can you be free in a cage just because you see the bars? Or does freedom require collective action, mass awakening, systemic transformation? History suggests collective transformation is nearly impossible. Too many people can't see the control. Too many defend it. Too many benefit from it. But individual consciousness expansion is possible. Always. Throughout history, individuals have achieved awareness beyond their conditioning. Mystics, philosophers, artists, rebels. They didn't free society, but they freed themselves. Mentally, spiritually, psychologically. Maybe that's all that's available. Maybe that has to be enough. Or maybe individual awakening accumulates. Maybe when enough individuals see the control, critical mass occurs. The system becomes unstable. Transformation becomes possible. We can't know. We're inside the system. We can't see what it looks like from outside. But here's what we do know. This documentary presented evidence across 6 domains: ancient texts describing genetic engineering and control systems, genetic anomalies suggesting intentional modification, institutional structures replicating ancient templates, economic systems extracting labor and resources upward, belief systems programming obedience, technology completing surveillance infrastructure. Each piece is debatable, each has alternative explanations, but together they form a pattern, and that pattern suggests comprehensive, multi-layered control operating across millennia. Whether that control traces to ancient aliens called Anunnaki, or ancient human elites who attributed their power to gods, the control exists. It's real. It's operating. Right now. And most people can't see it, won't see it, will defend it if you point it out. But you've seen it. You've followed the evidence. You've considered the uncomfortable possibilities. You've looked at human civilization not as inevitable progress, but as potentially designed constraint. That changes you. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. You'll notice the patterns, the hierarchies, the control mechanisms. They're everywhere, in every institution, every system, every interaction. That knowledge is a burden. It's uncomfortable. It makes life harder in some ways, but it's also power, because awareness enables choice. Maybe not complete freedom, maybe not escape from the system, but conscious navigation instead of blind obedience, intentional action instead of programmed behavior. And maybe that's what matters. Not whether we can break free completely, but whether we can live consciously within the constraints. Choose our battles, build what autonomy we can, resist where resistance matters, and preserve something human, something conscious, something aware, something that refuses to be completely controlled in a system designed for total management. The Anunnaki, if they existed, may have established control systems at humanity's origin, or humans may have established them and attributed them to gods. Either way, those systems persist. They've evolved. They've become more sophisticated, more invisible, more total. But they're not absolute. Nothing ever is. Cracks exist. Spaces remain. Awareness creates possibilities that unconsciousness doesn't. So here's the final question. Not are we controlled? We are, that's clear. The question is, what will you do with that knowledge? Will you deny it? Return to comfortable ignorance? Pretend you didn't see? Will you despair? Give up? Conclude freedom is impossible and stop trying? Or will you act? Within constraints, with limited options, against massive, systemic power? Will you claim whatever autonomy is available? Will you guard your consciousness? Build alternatives? Resist in small ways that accumulate? The choice, and it is a choice, maybe the only real one, is yours. The control is invisible until you see it. The chains are inescapable until you test them. The system is absolute until you find its weaknesses. You've been given the tools to see. What you do with that vision determines whether you're truly controlled or whether you're something else, something the system didn't account for. A conscious human who refuses to be fully programmable. That might be the only rebellion that matters. The only freedom available. The only thing the Anunnaki, whoever or whatever they were, couldn't completely predict or prevent. your awareness, your choice, your resistance. It starts now.